think we are good to go.
I don't see anybody waiting to come in. So
Yeah, looks like we may be it. This might be our crew today, which is great. Very exciting.
guess we jump right into the agenda if you like. I want to do introductions really quickly, and maybe Dan, you lead that off.
Perfect. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I think I know everyone here. I'm Dan Matz. I work in GoPIF, and I think, as everyone knows, I've been doing a lot of the staff work to support the task force's efforts. I'm really excited for this conversation in particular. I think there's a lot of really interesting, fruitful conversation, and looking forward to hearing what comes out of it over the next few weeks and months here. And I'll just bounce it over to Jay.
Hi, my name is Jay Brenchick. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the City of Auburn, and excited to be part of this public sector group. We've not done a whole lot with AI in Auburn. We started taking some steps, and then when I was chosen to be on this task force, we said, okay, why don't we wait and develop our policy and do some of our things come October.
Thanks, Jay. Andrew, you want to jump in?
Yep, sure. Nice to see you all. Andrew Butcher. I serve as president for the Maine Connectivity Authority. And looking forward to this chat. I think we are, as a technical advisor to the task force, probably coming at this through a couple lenses, both as far as the infrastructure, the demand and use of the infrastructure, the implications for both state and non-state assets, and the implication for how people are using and not able to use an expanding portfolio of technologies. So looking forward to the chat. Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Andrew. And Commissioner.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Curran, the new director of GoPIF. Dan has been bringing me up to speed with all things AI, and I'm looking forward to learning more from all of you.
Thanks for being here. And I think most of you know me. My name's Nick Marquis. I'm currently the Chief Information Officer for the state of Maine, and I have felt like I've been drinking from a fire hose in terms of AI and learning and hearing what other states are doing. And so it's a super hot topic today. It's relevant in so many different ways, and I'm excited about the opportunity to explore this more with all of you and kind of play out how we might be able to let it work for us here in the state of Maine. So, all right. Next item on the agenda, Dan, do you want to? Were you planning on taking us through?
Yeah, I think so. If that works.
Yeah.
So at this point, I think maybe Sarah, with the sole exception of you, sort of, we've been involved in a lot of these conversations, and you will continue to come up to speed here. But we've been working now over the last 6 months to really think about the implications of AI for the state of Maine, for the economy, for the workforce, for potential harms, and then I think really critically this sort of how government in the state, both at the state level and at the municipal level, as well as many other sort of levels in the middle there, can really start to leverage these new technologies in a way that is impactful, efficient, safe, and really helps to improve the delivery of services to the people of the state of Maine. I think we're really at the outset, I think, of this particular portion of the conversation. We have a meeting scheduled for the end of June that will focus with the entire task force that will focus on this topic really in conversation and consultation with the rest of the group. But this subgroup, as you all know, has sort of been pulled together to start to think about what this might mean, and you all sort of self-selected into this group and hoping to pull out over the course of the next 2 or so months some good sort of draft recommendations that can hopefully come back to the group in the fall and really get going here. So in terms of sort of the scope and the deliverables and the work plan here, I think a little bit of this, portions of this, I think we can work out amongst this group here. I think in terms of the deliverable of what it is we're looking at here, as you all know, we've sort of gotten a series of questions that have been drafted and proposed by us as staff and by our co-chairs, and which we will discuss with the larger group at the end of June at that meeting on the 25th. And our charge is really to come up with draft answers that could sort of slot in under these questions that could then again go back to the group for approval, for discussion, for validation, and for refinement before we sort of turn them into something resembling a report at the end of all of this. What Nick and I have sort of been discussing in terms of a specific work plan for this sort of small subgroup here is breaking out the work a little bit into sort of 3 buckets and 3 areas. And I think the shorthand here that has been helpful for me is thinking about, number one, what are we really talking about here? What are the use cases that are really exciting? What are the ways that government can really leverage some of these technologies? What are the outcomes and the sort of best case scenarios for how we can again deliver public services in a better way? So that's bucket number 1, and I think there's some sort of nuances in there that we can definitely dive into. Bucket number 2, I think what Nick and I have said is really the how, right? Like, what are the roadblocks to actually putting some of these into action? And Nick can speak almost better than anybody about some of the many ways that we have to prepare, the way that we use data, the way that we interact with external vendors, the way that we have our procurement rules set up in order to make sure that we are getting the most out of these technologies, as well as Andrew, I think you already spoke, but the actual sort of connectivity and energy resources that we will need to put into this as well. And then the third piece that I think maybe we will focus, I imagine, an entire sort of meeting on here, is to think about municipalities as sort of their own creature and their own sort of separate subgroup, and to really do a deep dive on what challenges and opportunities can we identify that are really specific and highly tailored to our municipal partners and our municipal governments. And Jay, obviously, we will look to you, I think, to help lead part of that conversation as well. When we get there, I know you and I have talked, Jay, about maybe bringing in some representation from the Maine Municipal Association to help provide some color and some background there as well, given their perspective. So that's the broad work plan. I think I'm more than happy to pause here and hear reactions. I think as I lay out these sort of the what, the how, and then this deep dive into municipalities, I think it really is a natural way to sort of organize what could be 3 full meetings of this group over the course of the next 2 months, and hopefully from those start to produce recommendations. Let me pause there. Nick, I'll look to you if there's other pieces that you wanted to add, and then happy to open this up for just reflections on that as a potential structure for this group over the coming months here.
No, nothing additional to add. I'll just say I think the structure that you outlined works well. Given the time constraint that we have and what we're tackling, right? This is a huge subject, and we have to boil it down a little bit into consumable bites. So I think that the what, how, and municipality structure really worked well for me to be able to keep my arms wrapped around it, not let it get too wide and get out of control.
Yes, Andrew, I see your question in here. The timeline here is we are the full task force is in the executive order is due to deliver recommendations to the governor and the legislature by October 31st. So we have until the end of October. The broad-based sort of game plan here for the larger task force is to spend these subgroups to work really through the end of July, come up with a set of draft recommendations. And when I say draft recommendations, I'm talking about, they can be pretty raw. I think they can, the ideas I think are the things that we're really interested in, the sort of wordsmithing and synthesizing and pulling together into something more polished is what sort of comes in August. And then when the big task force takes a break through the month of August, we all come back. We have 2 meetings in September and 2 in October, and we are going to have our subgroups over the course of those 4 meetings present what they have come up with, and then have folks react, have folks pull ideas out that they really like, refine, think through some of the implications, and then turn those into a draft report, and then ultimately a final report. So does that? All right, wonderful.
Yeah, that's helpful. In general, I appreciate that sort of honing of focus for us. I think those align with whatever minimal perspective I think I've been able to surface in some of the previous conversations. So I think that aligns well. I think the only thing, and I'm wondering just where it fits, is just as part of the charge that you are mapping out is support for best practices and implications for municipalities. The policy landscape is not in a vacuum and remains fluid. And one of the things that I'm hoping that we spend a minute talking about is the pending federal legislation as a moratorium on state policies. And so I guess I could offer, based upon the framework that you've articulated, that fits into bucket 2 of the how, and the sub bucket of potential roadblocks or considerations. And if that's where you see that living, cool. I just think it needs to live somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with you, Andrew. I had that on my list as well. I think through the process and what's happening, it's not a done deal until the Senate gets a chance to churn on things. But it's something we have to take into account, that there's the real possibility that it does come out the other end, and then that it's challenged after the fact through the legal process as well. But it's kind of a scary prospect.
No.
Cool. I'm putting in the chat in case for any reason, Sarah, this isn't on your radar or anyone attending and Nick, this goes to, I think one of your charges for us today is just a useful article that has several other links and resources associated with it around the status of that legislation and how it's unfolding.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, and I grabbed one out of on the same issue, and I can put it in there too. It's from a tech publisher that we interface with a lot, talking about it as well. So
yeah. Sarah or Jay, any other reflections that you want to share before we start getting into the meat here a little bit on structure, on logistics?
Nothing for me. I have to say I kind of feel like I've been drinking from a fire hose as well. I've 2 weeks ago I was at the MMA day for AI, which I found very useful, and of course you and I attended another AI event. So I like the layout that we've got. I don't think I've got anything new or different to share as of yet.
Great, and I'll also just say, Jay, I think we want to do a municipal deep dive, I think for a meeting, but obviously many of, if not all of the sort of what and how meetings I think are going to be just as relevant, but just want to make sure we give real airtime and space for this sort of specific municipal issues. Great. All right. Cool. Well, more to come on this, and I think we have a little time carved out towards the end of our time together to talk about cadence and setting up another couple of calls sort of on the logistical end. But I think given I think that sort of covers a little bit of what I wanted to talk through today. And I think I'm happy to turn it back to you, Nick, to get into the fun part.
Great, sounds good. Yeah, and as Andrew alluded to, there was an ask in the notes if you have a particular news story or anything about the public sector use of AI to kind of bring it to us, and especially if it was something that was interesting to you or a use case that you thought was really relevant to the state of Maine. If anybody would like to start, I know Andrew, you just dipped your toe in the water with your article. I don't know if you wanted to continue to expand on that a little bit, or if anybody else wanted to jump in. I had a couple myself as well that I could bring to the table. I think you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have more from that. I feel like there's a number, I found that piece in particular useful, and that there's a couple links to I think both some podcasts and other analysis around not just public sector implications, but I think just sort of the role of both state and federal policy and how that's weaving in. So it's been a useful resource for me to go back to and help sort of refine some of the, I think, 3 lenses that we're trying to think through some of the work around. At some point, Nick, I mean, I'd love to hear what you're looking at and sort of what is informing some of the priorities from your standpoint. But I am also, and Dan, I think I've shared this with you, in anticipation for this working group and discussion, have tried to do some assessment of connectivity considerations within MCA's ecosystem of entities, right? Like internet service providers have a much better sense of implications here probably. And so have tried to survey them, have some preliminary findings that would be happy to share as a starting point at some point in today's conversation or our next working group.
Yeah, and certainly, Andrew, when the time's right, I could kind of take you into some of the thought process that we're looking at here at the state. I can drop an article I thought was kind of interesting in the chat for you all. And it's one of our neighboring New England states. And they've been pretty much on the, send it to everybody here, have been pretty much on the bleeding edge in terms of AI and data. This is the state of Vermont. This particular article outlines that they've worked with OpenAI and they have created what they call ChatVT, which is essentially a compartmentalized internal chatbot to service Vermont state employees. It's structured in a way that, depending on your role in state government, you have access to different data sources that would allow you to progress in work that you're trying to do. If you work in procurement, you're probably going to have access to data around forms. You have access to around procurement laws, that sort of thing. Whatever the competitive solicitation requirements are in the state of Vermont. The thing I find really interesting about it is that on the surface, it looks as though they've put this together in a way that it's really cost effective too. I think the article noted something like $300 a month in compute costs. Yeah. Which, if you think about all of the power demands that we're hearing about AI taking, I just saw a report the other day of this massive data center. Was the Starlink or Star something data center that's being built in Texas? It's huge. Like it's going to consume, tons and tons of power. I think one of the big things, knowing the CIO and knowing the director that was in charge of this, Josiah, from my interactions with them through the CIO community, is they were really tight with data. They had their data management, data governance program really tight and set up so that they could do this. And that's a space at state government where we're still working to make some headway. There was some legislation 2 years ago, LD 1610, which established a data management, data governance program in state government through a collaborative effort between Secretary of State's office, DAFs, and the state archives. And it's a large collaborative effort amongst the three to really kind of get our hands around data. And structurally, there's some challenges. There's ownership of data. There's the ability to grow a discipline. One person or two people does not make a data management discipline. So I think that's one of the big things that we're going to have to really lean into. The state of Maine does have a chief data officer, and he is embarking in several efforts to start looking at data and collaborating with these data custodians that we've established throughout our agencies to try and get that program up and running and get that data in a place where we could lean into this a bit more. Not to go down too far into the weeds, but I've also heard like the University of Maine is doing something similar in that they're looking at AI constructs that allow people to do their work quicker, faster, easier, but also within the guardrails determined. So, I think of things like being able to feed requirements for a RFP into an AI model, and then coming out the other side of that is a 90% complete RFP that conforms to all of our competitive solicitation guidelines. It has all the right contractual language in it, versus having to have somebody do that every time by hand and potentially have variations or missed items. So I think this speaks to the fact that it can be done, not without its roadblocks, but it's there, and it's what I feel like is kind of a small bite at the apple. It's not a huge bite at the apple.
Nick, can I ask you a follow-up there? You said so Vermont had they had already done a lot of the groundwork, the data management groundwork, and had that sort of, as you said, tight and everything. How is Josiah finding the rollout of that? Have you heard from him? I skimmed the article that you just said, but has he been excited about that?
Yeah, I've been to several sessions and I've talked to Josiah a little bit. He's extremely excited about this technology in general, which reflects in his his desire to make the rubber meet the road. I haven't specifically had a chance to talk with him about ChatVT, but I'm hoping to see him in July at the next NASIO conference and be able to pick his brain a little bit more. I was also thinking, and I think you and I talked about this, about potentially seeing if he might be willing to come to speak to one of the task force sessions, and folks get an opportunity to hear right from him.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Jay, I see you've put one in there too.
Yeah, I put one in about the state of California because a couple of things stuck out to me. I mean, they do cover, I think, the things we've typically talked about making government more efficient. And I think some other things that were talked about at different conferences I've gone to is an easy way to dip your toes in is through chatbots, especially because government websites are notoriously known to just be stacked up with information and hard to navigate. So that's a great way to dip your toes in. But the one thing that kind of stuck out to me is that they were in California trying to come up with some AI products that would help people recovering from the forest fires. And granted, I don't think we would be big with forest fires, but we've had our natural disasters, and we've certainly applied some state funds to them. So the reason the California one stuck out to me was their natural disaster thing, which it just stuck out because I don't think I had thought of it yet, and I don't think in any of our talks to date we had chatted about that aspect. And that's really what is only a bit different about that article than I had actually, ironically, seen the Vermont one when I was looking around this morning for articles to look at. You know, that's the one that stuck out.
Yeah, I did see another article on California, and I think one of the big things is that Governor Newsom got involved really quickly and really early. I think his executive order was the end of 2023, which drove a lot of this innovation. And I mean, California is a powerhouse in terms of IT. There's no way around that, right? But I found it really interesting how they could take a broad scope and really kind of narrow it down into topics like you outlined, Jay, that really had a positive or have a very positive effect on Californians' lives. Like people struggling with fire. I think there was some of the things he talked about in that other article too was dealing with call centers. Shoot, what was the other one that I thought was really insightful? I have it up. Healthcare, so it was dealing with healthcare facility inspections, and that kind of clued me into the fact that the state of Maine does a lot of professional licensing. Right? So is there an opportunity there in a broad scope of professional licensing to leverage AI? But I just, like you, what I took away from the article that I read, which was from Pew, was that they were really leading the charge. They were jumping in with both feet and trying to be transformative with it.
Yeah, I think
Thank
that
you.
they're a good state to watch. And hopefully they don't make a lot of mistakes, but it's always nice to have somebody out front doing some things and see how it works for them before taking it on yourself. I think they've got the bandwidth that if they make some kind of project doesn't go the way they want, they've got the bandwidth to take care of it. Whereas I'm not quite sure, especially at the municipal level, but even state level, that we can do that as well.
Jay, oh, go ahead, Andrew.
No, I'm also good.
Jay, I was going to react here to, again, just skimming through this article. I think this gets a little bit at one of the other sorts of axes that I think Nick and you were talking about, of like ways to think about government public sector use of AI tools. And there's sort of two areas where we really see things. And number one, there's a couple of examples in here. We've already heard a couple of examples of sort of the time saving, efficiency, sort of, for the lack of a better term, somewhat low hanging fruit of things that ChatGPT that we know can do. They can help you write RFPs. They can help you write notes and emails, and it can sort of get you some of the way towards a final product with obviously a human in the loop as well. And then there's sort of this other piece that's like this somewhat pie in the sky, bigger picture. How do we make big jumps in the ways that we deliver services to people? And I think that's maybe it's obviously a larger project with a longer time horizon. But I'd be really curious to, like, if this group is interested in framing a set of recommendations in sort of a couple of different horizons in that way. In terms of there's things that we can adopt that are low touch, relatively, right? Low touch, lower effort, probably lower cost, and then there's, let's be really blue sky here and think about what are the real, like, big sort of deep problems. And I mean firefighting in California, I imagine, is a large focus of how do we make that better. And so I really like the breadth here that this article sort of shows of all of those things sort of filtered in together. And I think it's a really smart way of framing all of the different possibilities, both sort of at the time saving level and then at the big idea level.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the low-lying fruit things before you get deeper into them. Of course, where I don't have necessarily an IT background, sometimes I don't know if a suggestion I'm making is low-lying fruit. So I'll give you a great example. What I do think is low-lying fruit on the municipal level is kind of an automated AI process for building permits and codes and zoning and reviews. What I know the state is extremely has a big backlog on is for state of Maine DEP when you need to do what we call the SLOTA laws, the site laws, those things. They've taken some of their workload off by giving state delegated authority to some of the local governments to do some of those permits for sites up to 10 acres. So that's taken some of the workload off. And so, for example, the city of Auburn has that for projects that are up to 10 acres. And we do those same, it's really doesn't take that long to do. So we get these done in like 45 days. Whereas the state, it takes over a year, and that's because they've got a stack that they're working their way through. So what I don't particularly know is how low lying that fruit is for like a particular project like that for the state level of permits and approvals. At least to get there's mounds and mounds of information that they're picking through, having humans do. So I don't know if that's it's the same type of projects, very low lying at the municipal level, but with at the DEP, is that also something?
Guess I'm smiling and looking at Sarah, given the overlap here of a lot of what we talk about within the resilience world as well, of the challenges around permitting, and it's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
So,
it's not a knock at the state or any department or anything. It's just they've got a lot of work and not enough people to do it. So would a specific project like that really pay off and be low-lying fruit?
Go ahead, Andrew.
No, Jay, I appreciate it. I mean, it's first I've heard or experienced that, things like permitting can be a delay or a challenge. I don't think I've heard that in any. I think it does feel like a cross-cutting point of pain, and I think that there's actually, in the spirit of sort of the sentiment around, Dan, as you frame, use cases and low-hanging fruit. I mean, this is a sprawling integrative cross-functional type of issue. The more we're able to identify a tangible and incremental activity to focus policy recommendations, I think is really useful. And I think, in the spirit of where are there some of the highest concentration of logged requests and or backlog or complaints, and like those may serve as areas to inform what the development of pilot projects and use cases might be. And I think about the implications that have as far as back-end use, user interface, and access for users. Like I just think about it through the lens of like Moz, which is, sorry if this ground has already been well covered and feel free to like stop me, but I think Moz is such a great asset for the state, and is so smart in that it recognizes that people who need to apply, who need a fishing permit or an outdoor permit, tend to do so on site at the last minute on a mobile device. And so it is one of the most user-friendly systems that works And because it's designed fully for the use of people and consideration of when and how they're going to use it. And I think that like that I have no understanding of the history of that, but my bet is that the Department of Inland Fisheries had to respond to a number of requests and were getting overwhelmed, and town halls didn't have the ability. It was not a system that worked yet, though a lot of people were looking to use it. What's the equivalent of that that would be useful to sort of prioritize from a pilot project or from a domain of exploration? Because I also think, and just to sort of reiterate, Nick, I think one of the points that you're gravitating to, which is the data management and tool utilization capability by people working in the public sector. Which to me, and Nick, we've talked about this, was exactly the lesson that I feel like we learned thinking about smart and connected infrastructure, the Internet of Things. It's really great that we're able to generate data at every point so that our infrastructure can work better. Is anybody able to utilize that data? Is there a system or protocol in place? And if they are able to use it, are they able to adapt their procurement such that they're able to make decisions in the time frame that is needed? So I think those cross-cutting themes of investing in capacity of public sector data literacy, data governance, data analytics makes a lot of sense and fits really well with also modified procurement practices.
Yeah, and another thing I took out of that conversation too, Andrew, which I think is an undertone of a lot of it is, but Jay highlighted it pretty well with his example of DEP, is there's an opportunity also, I think, in these cases to feed into specifically the sub team that's focused on economy. Their last question is what supports might Maine small businesses require or benefit from AI technologies? If we can inherently support small business in improving processes and expediency so that things are coming to bear quicker with higher accuracy, and they're not waiting for a permit from DEP, or they're not waiting for a license. Like all of that, I think leans into that same ideal. It's using the tool in a way that moves things forward, that might not otherwise have that opportunity.
Nick, one of the things I just want to sort of tack on to that, and I'm sure each of us has our own perspective on it. And Dan, feel free to rein me in here. But when we think about the work that we're trying to address and support through a digital equity lens, I think about like currently we need to be supporting, we have a plan and are supporting digital navigators that help, older largely, but, many other disproportionately impacted populations access, basic internet function and service, right? Like people still benefit from getting somebody to help them turn their computer on, know how to log on to the internet, know what to do when you get to the internet. And I think it's just worthwhile highlighting that if there are still people that are at that level, of which there are many in Maine, being able to actually engage and participate and utilize tools like this and understand and have trust in it and feel safe doing so, is a major factor. And I don't mean to like beat that drum too much. However, I also feel like it's a really important element when we think about economic implications, workforce implications, and the design of public systems intended to interface with people.
I might be straying just a little bit, but along kind of these same notes, when we talk about areas where Maine government could prioritize, for a set of projects. And then also you get into our second question of what precautions should the state consider. this is kind of more big picture, but we have a lot of either like quasi-governmental organizations as well as associations. So, like for me, those would be like Maine Municipal Association and Economic Development Council of Maine. And so when you're considering some of these projects, it would be great to interact with those folks who interact with the state of Maine government so they can give their input as to where they're seeing the challenges are. And then also they can participate in the testing of the project before it really goes live. So you're not putting it all onto one department in the state government or all on, a small municipality doesn't even have the bandwidth. So I give like a good example of what I'm talking about. I had thought of a project. I was talking with the Rue Institute about a back office AI project where I could punch in the capital investment in machinery and tools, the jobs created, all these other elements. And in the end, the AI would not just look at the state of Maine incentives, because those are pretty easy to look at, but also take a look at all of the federal programs. And the challenge there is the federal programs come and go. So at the local level, it's hard to know. But anyways, what it would do is put together a possible incentive package for a company. And Rue Institute loved it. But as we talked more, I was going to have to be doing a ton of testing. And so and I couldn't do it all myself. So we kind of tabled that until I would have a chance to talk to the Economic Development Council of Maine to see if everybody wanted to be a part of that testing. And then I'd also see if the state wanted to as well. So that's kind of an example of what you could do. And so it's in the same vein, but I think
it's a great idea, Jay. I have jotted it down in my notes for us to keep in our brains.
yeah, there is like the I forget what the association's called, but they've got a chat board where it's all the planners and permit folks, and there's an association there. And then you've got your developers who are trying to develop affordable housing. Merida, Maine Real Estate and Developers Association, those groups.
Jay, you're prompting it's a really helpful point. It's prompting a question for me that Dan, you may have better insight than the rest of us. There are a variety of different use cases that could get designed, scoped, overseen, managed for real-time utilization in some aspect of public sector, public domain. There's also a couple different academic and training and education support programs in motion, in development, being talked about. Can you give a snapshot of, to the extent that you're willing, able, or comfortable doing so? Obviously this is a big area of focus for what the Rue Institute is designed for. University of Maine is also rolling out a concentration and target around AI, if not already rolled out in the Maine Center. And I know that the Maine Community College system has largely recognized the significance of professional services and data analytics into a variety of their programs. Are you able to give a snapshot of the state of the sort of educational and academic capacity and partnerships that could serve as that type of resource for us to wrap into some of the discussion? Or is that something that maybe is a part of a future subgroup conversation?
I think it's a great question. I think you laid out a lot of the big players already in the list you just gave. Um, I mean, I know we talked about it a little bit in our meeting at the beginning of this month on AI and the education system. I know the Department of Education is thinking about how to train teachers and how to talk to K-12, PK-12 folks, educators and administrators about these topics. In terms of sort of partnerships, I think we obviously work very closely with a lot of the folks that you just mentioned. I'll also say we've talked, and we're also as a state very fortunate to have some of our private universities that have done some really interesting work on AI as well. Colby has the Davis Center, which is a great resource. I'm sure a lot of folks saw the news of the new big investment in at Bowdoin. Yes, slipped my mind for a moment. Yes, at Bowdoin. And so that's going to be, I imagine, a large area of focus for them. I think it is completely it is a reasonable suggestion to think that a possible version of something that comes out of the group that we're in now is to recommend long-term governance and partnership strategy, that where the state thinks about who are the folks that we need to make sure that we have a direct line into, both at the academic level and then, Jay, to your point, at the sort of association level, and who have ears of folks who are on the ground. I mean, again, I'm looking at Sarah a little bit because in a lot of ways this is not dissimilar to some of the work that the new Maine Office of Community Affairs is talking about doing. Is how who to make sure that they have again a direct line into in order to create the kinds of partnerships and strong coalitions in order to address intractable and difficult problems. I think it's a really strong piece that I had not. I appreciate you bringing that up, Andrew, because I think a place that I did not elucidate in the initial sort of run up to this is sort of thinking about governance and what the state should think about should be doing in the long term around policy around these things. I know, and Nick, I know your team is thinking about it from sort of the technical and technology side. What is the long term future of that in the state? And I think there's an interesting conversation to be had about what that means from a policy and again a convening and partnerships perspective as well, and how we can continue to. We have an October 31st deadline for this work, but AI is not going away on November 1st. So a lot of these problems I think are going to continue to be something that we think about how to wrestle with. So happy to continue down that conversation in this group, or that also may be an interesting topic for the sort of how, right? Who are we engaging with? How are we bringing them to the table, and where in the state is that does that apparatus sort of live? Might be an interesting topic for that group.
So you're headed exactly where I was sort of trying to get to. And that is, this group, we can't have 5 people decide, here are some pilot projects and this is what you guys should do. It's really us helping to develop the thought process and the framework from which to work from, that the Department of Transport, that each department could follow a very similar framework. It's just starting with who are your partners, who do what associations and partnerships do you work with, both private and public sector, and then, all the steps you'd follow there, and then just give some of the real low-lying fruit ideas like the chatbots and, already with Department of Transportation as well as Public Works departments, whether they know it or not, they're using AI because they've got all these systems they use to drive the roads and inspect the surfaces. And already that's starting to be, that data is analyzed by AI as averse to, just a few years ago it was people. But yeah, that's where I feel we're headed. And I don't know if that means that we want to invite somebody to even join us on some of these conversations the next 2 or 3 months, whether that somebody like who is kind of overarching, not a real specific group. Like, for example, maybe Brian, I forget his name, but the head of IT for Maine Municipal Association, somebody like that, who has a little still, it's tapping into an association, but he's got like a global perspective.
Couldn't agree more. Happy to continue to game that out, but I mean, we're looking probably to have Brian maybe to come for depending on how this all shakes out, but potentially to speak to the larger group as well. But seems really relevant for this group that we're obviously as we continue to pull this together. I just want to quickly flag the one I decided to go to do our pre-work activity as well, and I just put one in there that we had been kicking around, and I'd been talking with Eric Austin at the beginning of this about this idea that he had heard about out of Indiana. That's an interesting use case that might be a little bit of a big swing, which is this sort of tailored career recommendation engine that is tied directly to when someone files for unemployment insurance. They are sort of given an access to this AI-powered career engine that analyzes their previous employment data and openings from public source open source job listings and tries to identify interesting solutions, and that's been out in Indiana for about a year now, and I think it debuted last spring, and they earlier this year in January or February did a big overhaul of it. So an interesting use case that my mind keeps coming back to as a cool use of AI for folks for that one specific sector of our state government.
Sorry, I haven't had a chance to review that. Is that, I mean, what's really interesting about that is the sort of force multiplier of better connecting people to custom opportunities. Is it state hosted, and does the state then sort of, is it also designed as like a revenue generating service that the state provides?
Great. I don't believe, I'd have to look into that. I don't know that they're what the cost and sort of access is here, but I don't see anything in this article, the quick skim here, but it's a great question to think about what the long-term payment strategy is for something like that. But it is a state, I mean, it was a contracted sort of vendor produced tool that the state hosts on their own website.
It's definitely a great use case. Go ahead, Andrew. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No problem at all. In the spirit of thinking about use cases and sort of one of the more fundamental that we're trying to better understand is connectivity considerations at large. Certainly, what does it look like if there is a proliferation of use with generative tools? Are there implications on bandwidth from a last mile standpoint? And then there's sort of the questions as to proximity to and implications on either data centers or more cloud-based networks and edge networks and the transport of data accordingly. So I just put in the chat a link to an article that highlights the implications of middle mile infrastructure and role in enabling both expanded 5G and wireless, as well as use of AI and data center AI data center needs. And so as far as use case, I think it's in that context, it's important. Nick, I know you know this and know where I'm going with it, but we are amidst building a state-owned middle mile network, designed to be redundant and to existing middle mile networks and augment and expand capacity. So it both serves as a use in supporting expanded connectivity needs for the public sector and a economic development asset for utilization as the cloud networks and edge networks that are going to be demanding and needing expanded hyperscaling infrastructure. So, and just, Nick, I know you're well oriented. Dan, you are too. Sarah, we've talked about it. Jay, I don't know if you're tracking on it or participants as well. And so what I'm really referring to in particular is the Maine online optical statewide enabling network, MooseNet, of which we are amidst the construction phase with in partnership with DOT and University of Maine Systems, Network Maine, as well as OIT and others. I put a link in the chat to the status to the project overview. In there is also a map of the extent of the network. And so I think as we think about use cases, as we think about whether it's public services or whether it's economic development assets, it is an important one to weave in.
Yeah, I think your middle mile part, I'm familiar with these types of needs only because when I was in Virginia, I was working on these types of projects, bringing middle mile and getting internet access and more speed to either rural areas of people, diverse populations. So I'm familiar, although I must admit I need to update myself on efforts particular to Maine.
Well, happy to elaborate more now or in the future, or offline and direct. Always nice to have broadband familiar people. It's its own subterranean universe.
Well, without this stuff, one of the big things that AI can bring is efficiencies for healthcare and help rural populations have access to healthcare. We keep on having various healthcare institutions close or limit their services, and so without your types of projects, Andrew, you can make the best of programs meant to help people, but if they can't get them delivered to them, then it's no point.
I'm going to put in a plug for our big conversation next week on AI and healthcare and a lot of those exact challenges, Jay. I hope we get a chance to talk about in a hybrid way and somewhat in person if people are coming to Portland.
Any other ideas, thoughts? And I do, Jay, I do hear you, and I appreciate what you say. Like, it's probably not this group that's going to say we're going to forge into these 5 territories with AI, but it's more about laying out some of the groundwork and potential governance that helps drive some of the decision factors for others to decide where they're going to go into AI and look at how they can use it to, to improve outcomes and provide better service. Hear that completely. Andrew, I appreciate the nod to the connectivity piece. That's huge. It's huge for folks, like you said, that need that connectivity at home and need to leverage, whatever new service is being put up that's going to hit AI. But it's also the reality is that in these instances, at states or municipalities, we're probably not hosting, the big iron that's running these chat instances locally, right? We're leveraging the cloud like everybody else is doing. And for that, like there's concerns at that infrastructure level too about how we have cloud adjacent connectivity, how we're able to feed into those clouds at low latency, in low latency scenarios. So that's, that kind of goes to the design too. And I think that the work that you're doing speaks to a lot of that.
Nick, I wasn't gonna do it, because, I wasn't sure how much we want to, but since you're talking about one of the things that has surfaced in our survey of 40 different ISPs, and folks that would be using and have implications for more use of AI, has been less of a understanding around bandwidth implications, but certainly a concern around latency implications. And so there is an interesting article from, I think it was February, from a trade group that addresses latency in particular as an issue of consideration that I'm putting in the chat for consideration.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Sorry, Dan. Yeah, absolutely pertinent to the conversation. And Andrew, I think it's probably not something that this group solves, but it certainly drives some of the conversations and the frameworks put together to help others decide what they can and can't do in delivery of services and grabbing a hold of AI.
Yeah, I think we touched on this when we were creating our subgroups. Clearly if you're in subgroup workforce, education's going to come in, and if you're in subgroup education, healthcare is going to come in. But the thing that's interesting is public sector, by definition, it's every, so this particular group has cross section into everything.
Yeah.
Jay, I was gonna make a very similar point about like a really interesting theme to pull out here is to, I think, and maybe this is something we can continue to you all can continue to chew on, but trying to find those and like sort of explicitly name some of those crossovers. And I think you already did a little bit with the economic group around permitting and licensing. And I'll just also, I don't have an article for this, but I heard an interesting idea a couple of days ago from a guy who helps manage a philanthropic funding and on some of these issues. And he was saying, if he was in the shoes of advising a governor or, a state government of some kind about ways to sort of harness the AI boom, one way to think about doing that is to sort of select a series of topics that are of economic priority for an administration or for a state, and provide clean, open source, curated data that's really good that folks who are running startups could then use to help feed into interesting novel approaches to using AI to address problems. And I think there's a really interesting series of economic development areas that I think you could imagine that going towards. And I think about things like erosion monitoring. And if there was a lot of data that was out there that the state sort of helped de-risk and help create, provide, you can imagine in 5 years, an upswell of startups that are taking advantage of the access to data. And so that's just another potential crossover with the economic development group, is thinking about what role does a state have, or does the public sector in general have in laying groundwork for startups or for economic activity, economic growth in that way? Just because the biggest input here for AI is data, and good data, and will make good things here. So
And what you were just saying made me think about a quick article I'd seen a couple of weeks back as to why state governments are the best labs. And I think it sort of speaks to that opportunity for the overlap and alignment of both data access, data governance, workforce and academic partnerships, and real-time tool development. And it's just interesting, sort of, I know like civic hackathons, I think, have like gone out of usefulness fit du jour, and I think for probably a decent reason. And when you think about the point that you're saying, the capacity for academic partnerships, and public sector data to inform both startup and real-time tool development is an interesting prospect. It actually, and one thing I'm being mindful about, time flies when we're having fun. I'm realizing I'm probably gonna have to jump here just at 4:30. If it's useful, I feel like when you framed out the 3 buckets for conversation, and the first being sort of what from a use case standpoint, for what it's worth, I feel like I'm hearing like maybe 3 or maybe 4 themes. To the need for internal capacity training and skills, I feel like has been a key point that was sort of with a complementary procurement related modification, or procurement related implications. I would maintain the lens of the issue of data transport and storage and capability. And then a 4th being a sort of real-time application set of needs, of which I feel like Jay has really nicely sort of honed in on sort of the need for ongoing intergovernmental coordination and a consistent framework for implementation. So I think that that's 4 general areas of the use case that I think we've talked about. I'm probably missing 1 or 2, but just what I'm trying to do is make sure I'm capturing stuff, because I also want to make sure I'm sharing it back with our team so that they're following up in whatever way is supportive.
And Andrew, you touch on something I think we had talked about, or I had mentioned in our big group early on. Dana, we aren't currently using AI to take notes on these meetings, or are we?
We are not currently using AI to take notes in the meetings. Yeah.
I mean, it's not too late because they're recorded, and then there's no reason not to use AI to take notes, only because it's all public conversations. And then, if, like, for example, if you take this recording and run it through, then our group can go through it to make sure AI has got what we meant, and then Andrew and I are better able to dust off the cobwebs and explain back to our folks what we talked about.
Sure.
But and doing that actually helps me. Like, I'm more than happy to go through the notes. Just it helps me to think through. I would just think it would make your job easier.
Well, I definitely appreciate it. I would look at Nick, I guess, for guidance there on acceptable use and sort of approved uses here. Don't want to overstep.
Yeah, let me take that back, and then Dan, are you able to get just a transcript from the meeting today? Okay,
yeah, because Zoom generates that automatically for recordings. Yeah.
So I'll look at what we can do with that transcript to highlight, Jay, what you were looking to do, and then I'll see what I can come up with potentially for live AI note taking. I'm not sure that my team has vetted any of those yet, but I'll check in with them and see where they're at.
Yeah, I use Plod and the city, I think, uses it as well for, like our public meetings. And you still have to have, a person go through them afterwards. But we didn't, even though we hadn't developed a big AI policy, it was just for our meetings that are already recorded and for public consumption. We were okay with using it in those types of situations.
Definitely take a look at that for you.
Didn't mean to create a project.
No. We
Here's one of
have
our low lying.
we have some vetting, some stuff in process of being vetted right now. So
Right.
I think I've heard Claude is one of them. So let me just follow up with it. But I think it's a great idea, right? If we're talking AI, hopefully we should be able to leverage AI.
Yeah.
And I think in the spirit of the second bucket that Dan lined up as far as like the how, to me, I think that's actually part and parcel, right? I mean, I think that is a decent area of, we're looking at use cases, if we're looking at real-time applications, and Nick, I think the, state parameters and how, you all are mapping that out, play a really important role in that. So I think that's a decent question to sort of roll into the how. And I guess I'll just sort of elevate that. I think one of the ones that has sort of bubbled in our conversation right now, especially in the context of real-time applications, is this prospect of academic collaboration, and the sort of sharing and the use of public data sets, both in academic partnerships in support and development of new tools and resources. To me, I guess, and Dan, maybe I'm thinking about the how in the wrong way, because I think based upon certainly the way Nick was framing it, the function of capacity and literacy tools and training, and access to, clean data, all feel like key, not necessarily enablers to the what.
Yeah, I think right in line with you. I think the few notes I've taken on this, I think the mindset here is talent, right? We have to have folks, there's training. There are sort of videos of British folks talking about AI tools that we take here at the state, but there's having the right people that know what they're doing. I think that's a huge part of it. I think sort of making sure that guidelines are in place, and I know Nick has worked over a year and a half or so to do that, and having that continue to be followed, and potentially seeing at honed or changed if necessary, but we've got a great place to start from there. But I think all of that is exactly where I'm thinking for that second call, which hopefully we can find some time to set up. It's exactly what you were saying of enabling. How do we? What are the many steps needed before we can start connecting folks filing for unemployment insurance with potentially new jobs? There are a lot of steps in the middle there, around data management, around all the many different pieces that you can imagine are go along with that.
So, Dan, it sounds like you dipped your toe into wrap up.
I may have. You caught me there a little bit.
Being respectful of the fact that I know Andrew said he had a hard stop at 4:30. I think we just want to make sure that we have that conversation about scheduling future meetings. And then Dan, I want to ask you, did you have anything else in terms of wrap up that you wanted to jump into?
I don't particularly. I think there's well, I guess I'll say, depending on our when we decide to meet next, I think it sounds like there's a little bit of sort of work that maybe at the staff level I could sort of help arm you all with, maybe turning some of what I've frantically been writing down here into something a little more organized that hopefully sums up a good amount of what it is that we talked about, and then providing a similar sort of agenda that will hopefully guide us through another meeting or two. In terms of scheduling, I think I'm certainly open to thoughts here. I think the way that a lot of the other groups have been organizing themselves is to do, given that really we're just getting started, and the sort of deadline here is by the end of July. Really, folks have been thinking primarily of doing a May meeting, a June meeting, and a July meeting, and it hasn't been sort of all like that, but I think that's been the general premise so far. And so if that sounds like a good idea, probably given the fact that we're closing on the end of May, maybe we would push it out to later in the month of June and mid to late July for the final convening here. How does that sound for a cadence?
Works for me.
Works for me.
Yeah, that can work.
I've got a question, I think, for Nick and Dan. I'm somebody who tends to think of things after the fact. And then I do have some stuff to share with the group that I've gotten at some of these other conferences, and I'm not planning on just dumping tons of information at people and feeling like I did my part because I shared a ton of info and PDFs. But if I put together a little bit of an email with some of my thoughts and ideas and some of the stuff that I learned at these recent AI conferences, do you want me to just email it to this group or send it to just Nick or Dan to, send out as you wish type of thing and take a look at it first?
I think I'd be supportive of you sending it to the group.
I think it's a small enough
Yeah.
team. I was thinking the same thing. I think if you're willing to pull some things together, I'm more than happy to read and add to our knowledge base here. I think that would be great.
Yeah, it's not a whole ton. It's just, I know me, and it's going to be tonight, and I'm going to be watching the news, and I'm going to say, oh, I should have said this. So.
Any strokes of genius in the middle of the night, we are more than happy to take any and all. So great. So maybe I'll shoot out a couple of dates to this group following this call. I think we don't have to get into the weeds of finding exact dates and times, but I'll shoot for something like the late June and then mid to late July, and try to find another couple of blocks that this might work. Any particular times in that range that you, off the top of your head, you're going to be traveling or away? Or I'm seeing a nod.
Late June, the last week of June is a little complicated for us, but could make it work as depending upon specific timing. But
okay.
I guess one other related question is it useful to think about if and when any aspects of this discussion or input gathering from any other existing working groups or task forces? I'm just thinking about the infrastructure implementation task force as one in which there's like, if there's a suggested prospect of intergovernmental coordination and or framework for selection of pilot projects and real-time applications, it's kind of like a built-in space to have some of that discussion with other groups. But Dan, that's where I don't know how you keep your stuff in order because it's a lot.
Yeah, just just staying above water here. But I think that's a great idea. I think we can figure out the right venue to sort of cross-pollinate a little bit here. I think there's a lot of really good groups. I was talking with Nick about how we maybe try to talk to other. We've got a handful of cabinet officials on our task force, but there's, as you know, many more. So if there's a way to get other input, it's sort of in its infancy, but if we can get people formally or informally to give us ideas that they've been stewing on, I think we can just add them to the list. I think that would be great.
At the risk of being too bold, I wonder if there's an opportunity leading up into one of the upcoming infrastructure implementation discussions to survey participants ahead of time and say, AI, effectively the AI task force subcommittee from a public sector standpoint would want to know what types of projects or activities or applications would be of priority for investigation, evaluation, incorporation into task force related conversations, right? Because like I would love to come to a conversation with a DEP saying, we know that one of our counterparts in a different state is using this for increasing processing time with permitting, right? Or whatever the equivalent is with any other agency. I feel like that would be, whether that is a chosen area of focus or not, or application, to Jay's point, that would be a way of accelerating some of those identified needs to inform use cases.
Yeah, I'll have to think about the timing because as I think about like the next time that group only meets bi-monthly, so we'll have to think about how to thread that needle a little bit, and also given the sort of up in the air nature of that specific group. But I think the idea is completely great, and we can maybe Sarah, you and I can explore ways to think about how to involve other folks and get the exact kinds of ideas I think Andrew you're laying out with from people like you said, like Melanie at DEP or others who are going to be the people that are maybe that this is closest to so that sounds great. So I think from a wrap-up perspective, I think that is good for me. I'm happy to turn it back to you, Nick, to close us out.
I think this was a great conversation today. I think we covered a lot more than I hoped we would, so that's awesome. I appreciate everybody jumping right in with both feet. More to come from Dan in terms of scheduling next meeting, and I'll work with you, Dan, to kind of turn those transcripts into notes so we can disseminate those as well. And I look forward to working with all of you at the next meeting.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Well,
everybody.
a few minutes back.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Take
Thanks,
care.
all. Good to see you.
Bye.